Okay, the doors are open. Let's see if we get some attendees. Good morning. Come on, Priscilla, Diana, we saved a front row seat for all of you. That's a great thing about a webinar. There's front row seats, no matter how many people we have. Come on in. Hey, as you come in, just so we know who's in the audience, if you could go to the chat box and put in, the city that you're in. If it's a city we're not going to recognize, the state or the country. We had a webinar yesterday that late in the evening that included people from Australia. So we had people all over Taiwan. It was pretty good. Fairfax, yeah, I'm in Bethesda, so we're not too far away. Yep, New York City, yeah, New Jersey, very good.
Oh wow.
Jeremy, yeah, Curtis, yes, South Carolina, nice.
Hey there, Jeremy.
Yeah. I love this. We're, using these tools, we can have impact. We can connect with each other no matter where we are. And, if something makes sense, move forward on it. Yeah, Toledo, very nice. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm in Ashburn. Our offices are in Tysons Corner, Virginia as well. So I think it sounds like a decent number of local people, but a lot from out of the state too.
Yeah. Keep it going. Who else is coming in? Okay, we're going to go literally just 1 minute more. California. What city in California? I have a lot of family in California for some reason. They kind of just spread out from the center of the country to the external. Boston, nice. Oakland, yeah. Love Boston. I bet you a lot of people say that. Right? Okay, so Ryan, you ready? I'm going to fire things up.
I'm ready.
Born ready, right? So to get things kicked off here, my name is Kirk. I'm the CEO of Foresight CFO. And so we have roughly 32 people on 3 different continents helping CEOs make better decisions. And in this case, get access to capital so that we have fuel in the tank to keep the planes flying. So in addition to that, I lecture at Georgetown University grad students. So as part of, the skills we talk about in the Growth CFO world are learnable, teachable skills. So I do that. I'm the husband to one, Nazarit, who I met in Venezuela, and the father of 2 boys who I'm very proud of. They actually, almost ironically enough, both ended up at West Point Military Academy. One just graduated and one just finished his first year. So that's kind of who I am. And my guest speaker here is Ryan. Ryan, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, so my name is Ryan Huss. I have the pleasure of running daily operations at Parabolis. We have an amazing team of people, and we're laser focused on serving the government contracting community, primarily small and medium-sized businesses. And I myself, I'm a father of 4. I live out in Ashburn, and I'm kind of a Northern Virginia resident, and I've been here for a while. But we take a lot of pride in working at Parabolis. We were founded by former government contracting executives and veterans. I myself was from a military family, and we take kind of a servant leadership mentality to our clients. And in essence, we're just trying to help them be financially successful. And yeah, we do that by providing bank style lines of credit to support their cash flow. But ultimately, it goes a lot further than that. So I look forward to shedding a lot more light on that later on in the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. And Ryan and I obviously bumped into each other. We're Growth CFOs working with CEOs, and he's a guy who has access to working capital for GovCons. But you can learn about working capital, even non-GovCons providers out there. But Ryan's niche is the government contractor, and from doing things for our clients, he really comes through and knows that niche. So Ryan, I'm glad you're here on this event with us to get the word out. And so what we want to do now, we want to find out who's in the room, and that'll help Ryan and I, direct our conversations and our examples to things that will be more relevant to you. So there's 2 poll questions, and your answers are anonymous, right? We'll see the numbers, statistical numbers, but we won't see a name associated with it. So everything is anonymous, and we definitely want to get up to like 70% or more of respondents. So the 2 questions are, what was your top line revenue in the prior year? And if you don't know, guess. And this year with COVID, do you expect things to increase, your revenues increase, decrease, or stay about the same. So in some of the, in previous webinars, I've been really surprised by some of the responses, that the impact of COVID was much different than I, thought going in. But great, we got 72. So 72% responded. We'll keep it open just a few seconds longer, and share the results with everyone so they can, again, statistically see what's going on here. And then Ryan, you're going to launch after this. We're going to get into working capital. What is it? How do we use it? Okay, good deal. I'm going to end the poll, share results, and look at this. I mean, you got most of us are doing something between 0 to 5 million of revenue, 88%. So the lion's share. Definitely a place where you might need access to capital. And then look at this. I mean, 47% expect their business to increase, with another 28%. So 75% are either the same or better. I mean, that surprises me, because I mean, if you watch the news, you might get scared, right? So that's good. So let's hit it. I'm gonna get us going here, Ryan.
Yeah. So it sounds like that population that is attending right now is exactly who we can help the most, because you're just either starting out and you really have designs on a lot of growth, and that is usually, those companies need a lot of help, and they need a financial partner. And so I want to get in further into that. But first, let's address, this term working capital. We throw it around a lot. Most people, including myself, we're not CPAs. The technical definition is current assets minus current liabilities. But effectively it's how liquid you are, and how much you can use money in your AR to pay your bills in the next 30 days. But ultimately, all business owners really want and need to understand is how well can they utilize cash and AR to pay their expenses.
Hey, right, to interrupt you.
That's really where the rubber meets the road here. And as government contractors, there's oftentimes you can increase your margins.
Hey, right, interrupt you. Your internet connection is bad. Can you? I think drop the video, and we'll rock and roll with the audio.
Sounds good. How about now?
Good.
Better now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, great. So should I start over on that slide, or should I just keep going?
We got the balance sheet definition, and then you're given your reasonable, realistic, practical definition.
Yeah. So ultimately, all really government contracting CEOs really care about is how well can they utilize the cash in their AR to pay their expenses. And there's a lot of ways to increase improve your working capital. Some are easier to do than others, and you can increase your margins. That may or may not be easy depending on the kind of work you do. You can sell equity in your business. You can replace short-term debt with long-term debt, but ultimately what contractors need is cash. And so that brings us to our next slide. And on this, what we're talking about here is the common problem that all government contractors face is there's a time between a bill of employees starting on a contract and being paid by the government. It's typically about 60 days. It can be slightly better, it can be slightly worse. But in that time, you're probably having 4 payrolls. You've got to pay healthcare, you got to pay rent, you got to pay 401k. There's a lot of expenses that have to be floated before you get paid. So that causes a cash flow problem. And this problem persists throughout the life of your company, especially when you're small, because if you're trying to grow, you're trying to add headcount to current contracts, and you're trying to win and grow leaps and bounds by new contracts. So it's important to understand how to fill in that gap with the right solution. So on the next slide, this kind of demonstrates my point. I think your working capital before and after actually getting working capital funding, it doesn't really change. But what does change if you choose the right financial partner is you get access to more cash. And that ultimately is what you're going to need to be able to pay these expenses. So the goal, increase cash as affordably as possible, and then manage that cash really well. So what we do is help you get access to the cash, and what Kirk does is help you learn how to manage it and more effectively, so you get more out of it and you set up for more growth down the road. The next slide there, Kirk.
Yeah, hey, right. Just kind of weigh in for a key point here. I mean, the working capital is not, it's not capital to invest in investments for other things for your business, to, you know, build out a sales force or build out an office. It's not that kind of money. It's literally just a timing difference between when you get paid from your government client or commercial client, if you're that kind of business, to your outlays of cash starting first, like payroll, making rent, utilities, and then you get paid by your client. So it's just to close the timing difference. That's all working capital is for. Okay.
Great point of clarification, Kirk. So, you know, especially, sounds like this group is largely made up of companies that have just started out or just had their first contract, or they've been around a couple of years and they're really looking to kind of gain that escape velocity to get to the next level. But you have a lot of options right now, and I think people oftentimes think they only have a few. But you know, if you're just starting out, you might have the first option you might choose is your own cash. Maybe you've considered liquidating retirement accounts, which may or may not be a good idea. Maybe you're borrowing from a family member. But you know, there's a lot of other options that don't include you using your own assets, and that can allow you to get the cash flow you need to get to being able to pay your bills and comfortably. The catch here is that there's a big range in cost and qualification factors. So what you see here is, you know, the bank on the left, they're the cheapest, but they're probably the hardest to qualify for. And then you go all the way to the right, and you have, you know, the merchant cash advance or payday lenders. And they're the easiest to qualify for, but they are so expensive that they'll eat all of your margin and more. And this doesn't include all options, by the way. These are kind of four broad categories. There's a couple options in between, like maybe some financial tech lenders like an On Deck or a Cabbage or a PayPal. But these are kind of the broadest ones that we see and that people tend to try to use to gain more cash. And you know, the most popular, I think, other than a bank up until now, has been factoring your receivables. That's kind of dead in the middle. And what we provide is a little more unique. And we sit between factoring and banks and provide a very unique solution for specifically to government contractors.
Yeah. Ryan, just to highlight one of your points here, I mean, like on the far right with the merchant account, the number between 5 to 6% is that's percent of revenue, right? So not interest expense, interest rates. So, you know, if you're making 10% bottom line net income, you just gave half of it to the lender, which doesn't make sense. If you're making, you know, something like 5% bottom line, you just gave all your profit and put the company into losses due to interest expense. That's going to hit your P&L. So in fact, factoring is not too different. I mean, it really eats up your bottom line. And you know, the way we look at it, we want to grow the bottom line, defend those margins as the business scales out versus, you know, seeing somebody else benefit from our hard work as CEO. So.
Yeah, great point. I mean, these are, it's helpful to normalize these costs to revenue because the cost models between all the options is completely different and they're very hard to compare. And so this is kind of just a general comparison so everybody can kind of get it in their head. Where does it normally sit on the income statement? And we can actually look at that a couple slides later. We can talk about the impact of the income statement. But you know, merchant cash advances are oftentimes 500-600% APR, and people don't really realize that. So it can get very exorbitant, and it's not really a viable solution. So you want to look at ultimately what is the best long-term solution that I can grow and that's grow with and is flexible to my needs that isn't going to eat all my margin, you know. Yep. So next slide there. So when we look at the income statement, kind of what I was saying before, I mean, you want to know how it impacts your margin. And these are broad estimates of the financing. So you see the revenue at the top. This is kind of just based on $1 million in revenue in any given year, based on average margins of cost of goods sold, including direct and indirect, and your OPEX, operating expenses as well. So let's say you have a conservative margin here. how much are you going to pay on your financing option. And so this is that same spectrum from banks all the way to merchant cash advance lenders. You can see that how this is impacted. So a bank might leave you with 65,000 plus in net income, and a Parabolis line of credit really isn't that far behind that. And then invoice factoring, you start to get less than 50,000, and then MCAs, it's less than 25,000. More than likely, if you were to use them for an entire year, you would be most certainly negative. So it's not really a long-term option. So this is just another reference point, a way to understand relative costs between the different options. So I think in the next slide, I want to dive a little deeper into each option. And so we can start with the banking option. So for many smaller contractors, it's going to be really challenging to qualify for a line of credit. There's a lot of boxes that need to be checked. You're going to have credit history, maybe a couple trailing 12, 24-month profitability. There might be some other ratios that they look at. And really, there's kind of a black and white to some degree on who can qualify and who can't. So there's not a lot of flexibility in those parameters. And every bank's different, but it's a great option if you can qualify. And it's typically going to be the least expensive. And the particular product you're likely going to be presented with here is going to be a standard asset-based line of credit that allows you to borrow against your accounts receivable. And it will allow you to begin pulling cash forward, but it may not be enough for your needs, depending on your margin and depending on how you're managing your cash. But for those who are, it's a good fit for. It's the first option you should be looking for. But I think it's usually something that people who are in the upper end of small business, it probably is starting to make the most sense, because a couple of things about banks. They don't always move very quickly. And that goes for the first approval. So let's say you apply, it might take 1 to 3 months to get approved for that. So if you're in a pinch, it's probably not your best option. And then going forward, if you need increased support because you're winning contracts, oftentimes they might not be able to do that to the end of the year. So your financials are in hand. So you win a contract mid-year, you need double of your facility size. It might not be an option depending on the bank. So that isn't as nimble as you might need depending on how you're growing. So how you're growing and how you're managing your cash is going to be critical about whether or not a banking partner is the best option for you. And I think there's going to be other stipulations involved in a bank that will be very specific to your performance. So there's going to be a frequent reporting of your financials, so they can get a beat on that. There's going to be a number of other metrics and maybe some covenants that they're going to be monitoring on a regular basis. So, I think there's always the specter out there. And this, so our banks primarily come, our clients primarily come from 3 different places. One is from a bank. Another is from a factoring company. We get a lot of companies that transition from factoring to us. And then it's just people who are just starting out. So one of the main reasons that people come from a bank to us is because they've tripped a covenant unknowingly. And the reason they did that's because any number of things that can happen in government contracting happened. They had lost a contract. There was a stop work order due to COVID or some other unrelated or unpredictable event. They had a significant delay on their largest invoice, and those can have significant impacts on the ratios that a bank would look at. And that can kind of raise a red flag. All of a sudden, you're being watched, and I think that sometimes makes people feel uncomfortable. So we get a lot of clients that come to us and say, it's nice to know that I'm not necessarily going to be tripping some unknown covenant and not have the financial support I need in the following month. So I wouldn't say that's a common feeling at a bank, but it is something to consider when you're considering a bank. So in the next slide, we'll look at factoring, and that has been up until now the most likely choice for those who can't qualify for a bank. And factoring as a tool is just another tool for managing cash flow. It's a perfectly good tool. Just what might be the limitations or what might be the positives here. And and just to be technically correct about factoring versus a bank line of credit or a line of credit with Parabolis, it's not really debt. they're actually buying your invoice. So you're selling an invoice and they're giving you an upfront advance on that invoice. So it no longer is your asset. It goes from your balance sheet to their balance sheet. And there's actually some significant implications on how a factoring company can serve you because of that technical definition. So, oftentimes factoring companies will only purchase certain subcontracts. They will only purchase, they'll purchase almost all prime contracts, but they will only purchase some subcontracts because of the nature of that prime contractor, right? So you might not have access to your full accounts receivable is kind of the big point here. Further, oftentimes they need an assignment in hand before they can buy your invoice. So that's one point of delay. Some require that you modify your contract and put them in the contract in order before they can buy an invoice. And then that invoice has to be approved before they can buy it. So in the government contracting world, it oftentimes can just be a very complicated relationship depending on how many contracts you have. And ultimately, you want to have access to as much capital as possible. And depending on where you are, you might not have access to full amount of capital as you would like. I think the expense of factoring companies really ranges. I mean, they can range from very reasonable costs to exorbitant in a way that you wouldn't even be able to predict, because the fees and the cost structures can oftentimes be very hard to understand. But ultimately, you're going to want to try to understand the apples-to-apples comparison of what factoring costs you on an annual basis versus a line of credit. I think those are the two real options you're going to want to weigh. And if obviously we're people that can answer that question, oftentimes you want a financial professional to answer that question, because otherwise you'll just look at your income statement at the end of the year and say, wow, that was a lot of money. And we hear that a lot. So it's not always the most flexible option. It is an option for working capital, absolutely. But it might not, it might be the best as a short-term option, maybe not the best as a long-term option. And the next slide, we'll dive a little deeper into the merchant cash advance companies. And, this is an interesting new financial product that has popped up over the past couple of years. And, they don't have an interest rate necessarily, which is kind of sneaky, because there are certain usury laws that exist that restrict how much a lender can actually charge a company, so that it doesn't become exorbitant and put them out of business. So the way they get around that is they buy a portion of your future revenue, and they just do it at a significant discount. And then they charge fees on top of that as well. So that's how they get around not having to charge an interest rate. But ultimately, when you start to look at the real cost of it and you analyze the cost of that, the APR, as I was saying before, I mean, if you got somewhere in the 40s, you're doing really well. But most likely they're 100% or more. And obviously in other industries, they range up. And so these are tools that you wouldn't want to use unless you were going to miss payroll the next day. You can get them same day. That's about the only benefit there. But this is not a long-term viable solution. And if you took nothing away from this webinar, it's to avoid these at all costs, preemptively decide who your financial partner is going to be, and you will never have to get into a situation where you'd have to take one of these as a loan. Now, there might be a couple of marginal situations where these might be a perfectly good tool to use in a very specific scenario, but they are not a long-term viable working capital option here. So,
hey Ryan, just kind of jump in here. I mean, in fact, I mean, I'm a finance guy, so we love the numbers, but for both factoring and merchant cash advances, it's very difficult to calculate some kind of effective interest rate. There's all there's fees, and it's not transparent, and you literally have to spend a lot of time just to figure out what you're paying to compare it to the other options, being Parabolist and the bank option. But neither one is friendly tools at all.
Thanks, Kirk. Yeah, so kind of bringing us to what we provide on the next slide, it's a fairly unique product in the marketplace. I mean, I'm yet to encounter any other lender that exclusively lends to government contractors and lends with this type of product. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. I mean, we were founded by former people who have been in your shoes, who used to run the company, and now they said, well, what would I need if I really was to run my company? What would be ideal? That's how it was designed. And I think that unique perspective is why we have offered this unique product. It doesn't really matter if we're the only ones offering it forever. I mean, in a perfect world, more people would come out and do it so that we could serve the entire population and we can fix this working capital problem that all contractors face. But there's a number of reasons why it's unique. So, you know, this is a true line of credit, very similar to what a bank provides, but we allow you to borrow a lot more because we let you borrow against accounts receivable. You also get to borrow against unbilled revenue. So that's typically a bunch of billable hours worked. All of your billable hours worked that have not been turned into an invoice. You can borrow against those as well, typically 50 to 65%. And then you can borrow against delivery orders. And delivery orders in this circumstance are product that you are either reselling to the government or deploying on contract. So it's physical items. So most of our clients are 100% services contractors, but we do have 100% resellers, and we have kind of everybody in between. And you can borrow against all of these simultaneously. So it really just builds the eligible cash that you're able to get in advance on so that you can pay all of your payroll before you get paid, all of your operating expenses, and any supplier down payments that are required before your product is delivered to the government. And so it's a very unique blend of collateral you can borrow against. It provides you a lot of access to capital at a very reasonable cost. And, it's typically about 1% of your revenue. And, but it really allows you to go after as many contracts as you want with confidence, knowing that we will increase support within a week of contract award. That's a pretty big difference between us and a bank because we're not federally regulated. We can move in a much different manner and be a lot more flexible when you win new contracts. So that's on the good side of the equation. On the bad side, if you run into a problem, we can be extremely flexible to help you out of that. So all sorts of problems exist, like the loss of a contractor, or work order, or critical employee, or significant payment delays. We help our clients do those kind of things all the time. And that's the reason we do that is because that's just the nature of the industry. If you're not able to do that, then you can only serve a client so well. And we get asked a lot, and people are concerned when they apply. Am I going to qualify? And at the end of the day, 99% of clients that we talk to, that we provide a term sheet to, that gets started in underwriting, they're going to qualify. I mean, if you have an active contract and you have minimal debt, you're likely going to qualify. And we will lend to those who just won their first contract, even if it's a subcontract, to the most seasoned of businesses that have been around for 20, 30 years, and they're doing $50 million in revenue. We serve and across every industry, from the cleared community all the way to the more civilian agencies, to resellers of boats and tanks, or commoditized laptops, to kind of everybody in between. So we pride ourselves on really speaking your language, and it was designed, the intent to kind of serve this community in mind. So
yeah, Ryan, really, from a leadership standpoint, your leaders are former government contractors, and deeply so. So they really understand, that the government's going to pay. As long as the work's being done, there's not a disputed invoice, the government's going to pay. It's just that they're not going to pay fast.
Right.
So it makes it, you guys really step up to come through for companies like the ones that we work with.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Kirk. Yeah, I'll talk a little bit, I'll go into a little bit more depth about our leadership in a few more slides and give you all a little bit more background on that. On the next slide, what we've done is just provide us a kind of a high level comparison to really give you a side-by-side on all of your primary options. And, I think it makes it clear that if you're gonna have any kind of working capital solution, I mean, a line of credit of some sort is definitely your best option. It's just a matter of whether it's with a bank or with a private lender like us that But either way, you're going to want someone who knows your industry. So if it's a bank, it's going to need to be with a group that has a government contracting group that really knows and speaks your language, or it's going to have to be with a lender like us who has been in your shoes and fully understands your world, right? And so that you can feel as though you have a nimble partner that is kind of agile to your needs. And the main difference between a bank and Parabolas is that while Parabolas is more expensive, the flexibility and greater access to capital that you gain through coming to a non-federally regulated lender who knows your space is significant for contractors, especially those who are looking to grow quickly. I mean, the growth can be a great problem to have, but it can be a problem if you're not with a lender or the bank who understands how to serve that growth. Because oftentimes growth can seem like a risk factor to a lot of people, to a lot of lenders, because if you grow too quickly, you can spin out of control, and it still takes managing, right? So it's not like the average bank is thinking about just the additional money that can be made off of you. They're thinking about, they're always looking at the risk, right? Whereas here at Parabolas, we're looking to celebrate that growth with you and just be there to support whatever it is you need to be successful. So I think on this next slide, there's kind of this common misperception of what debt really is, and I think there's a stigma that exists out there that says debt is bad for your business. Period. By having any kind of debt, it somehow signals that your company's in trouble or in distress, and it could have negative implications for anybody who found out about it, or maybe it's psychological for you. But because we do hear that a lot, when in fact, I mean, debt, makes this economy go around, and most companies, name a Fortune 500 company, all of them are using debt to their advantage, and it's really just a tool that you can use to manage your financial health, grow faster, and will grow faster than you otherwise would have by using other people's money. I mean, it's fairly simplistic managing. And so, one of the most important questions to ask when you're considering debt is, what is going to be the return on the investment or the return on the cost of debt? And I don't see people asking that question enough. And I don't think they kind of turn the question on its head enough to understand it. But if you look at this simplistic example here, if you were considering whether you should pursue a contract that you can only execute if you take on debt, you need some kind of debt support in order to take it on, because you just don't have the cash flow. Consider this equation right here. And effectively, if you were going to yield $1 million in revenue on a contract, and your, you had $50,000 of net margin from that contract, and your cost of debt was $10,000. So using us as an example, 1% of revenue, $10,000, your return on investment is effectively 400%. And I think when you look at it like that, if you're looking to get to the next level and you're currently not quite sure how to do that, or how you're going to support it, then that is a question you should ask yourself. And this is where normalizing the cost of debt to your revenue is extremely helpful, and understand the value of a contract and what the cost of supporting that contract financially is, and understanding how those two are related. That can be all you really need to understand whether or not you should do it.
Yeah. Hey, Ryan, another analogy is that, by in this case, you're taking on working capital just to fund the timing differences. So you're not funding loss, you're not funding investments to grow different, capabilities of the business. And so the debt really acts like you're putting fuel in the tank, so that you can go, you can make it between the cycles of when you do the work and when the government actually pays you for the work, through the prime or directly. So it's it's the cost of fuel on some level.
Great point. No, I think that analogy holds here, and it is important. It's just a really important point to consider, and I always try to accentuate that to any of the CEOs we work with, because there's opportunity cost to not going after more contracts, right? Yeah. So,
and as you scale, that gap grows bigger, right? So what you can manage at one level, maybe look what numbers out. let the numbers be in your own head at one level, but then if you 2x your company, or 5x your company, you're scaling on some rapid rate. Be able to manage those timing gaps becomes increasingly challenging. So.
Yep. Great points, Kirk. So I'll end with, the next slide, and, or my part of this presentation by saying, talking a little bit about our leadership and our founders. And this is a picture of our chairman and founder. His name is Dr. Ed Versoff, and he founded a company called BTG, and he started out with just himself, just like everyone does, it sounds like. He was a built person, and he grew it from just himself over a couple, probably 10 years, not quite, to $600 million in revenue, and then he took it public. So, not only did this allow him to understand everything that someone like anybody who's on this call would need from a financial perspective as a contractor at virtually every stage of growth, but it's also, he's just an immense inspiration to what it takes, and that you can be successful growing your business, and it is possible. I mean, he was inducted in the Government Contracting Hall of Fame last year, as he's just a very wise person, but he's also the person behind our company and behind our product design that is meant to benefit you, and it's meant to be everything that you would need to financially support your company. And Ed and our CEO, Bruce Lyman, who's also still kind of fluidly in and out of the Pentagon and is very still tied into the community. He also ran 2 government contracting companies. So he fully understands and is completely compassionate to your situation and your position and what you need. And so what we provide is not just a product, it's conversations with you, helping you figure out problems. There's a lot of strategic advisory that Ed and Bruce do with our clients. I mean, we're constantly engaging with our clients, and that is open to everyone. And it's whatever we can do to make you more successful is really where I think what our clients like about us the most. I mean, the product is what they need, but ultimately it's the relationship and our perspective and the wisdom that is provided on this end that they really appreciate, and they feel comfortable knowing that they have a partner that's going to help them be successful.
Yeah, it really makes a difference. And more than ever, I mean, at one point, people kind of took their relationship with their lenders for granted, maybe not know each other too well, but, with COVID, the pandemic, PPP funding, it became even more important that the banker and the CEO actually know each other. And I can give firsthand accounts that, I know Bruce quite well, and he, his consulting, his thoughts, his the way he'll structure a loan to make it work for the business is off the chart. So Ryan, is it fair to say, if I'm a CEO of a scaling government contracting business, that I should at least look at the banks and pair list to find out what solutions each one has for me? Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. We never really drive a hard sell. It's really a consultative conversation when we talk to prospective clients to say, what are your options in front of you? What are the most beneficial to you, and what can we be the right partner to help you? And we just help people understand what the art of the possible is and how we can help them, and then they can make the decision to kind of decide to move forward or not. It's always consultative in nature, though. Once our clients become clients, it continues, and it just continues on how can we help you? So I think it's always worth a comparison, and we're always happy to provide that apples to apples comparison of cost and other factors.
Yeah, and it's like having options lined up side by side, and then make the choice of the one that you want. So it's really good.
Yeah.
So Ryan, I'm gonna take the next step here. We're gonna talk about. So Ryan gave us 4 options. Access to capital. The first 2 are really good options. Worth working with to get something on paper that you can actually execute. So I'm gonna take you through the habits of profitability. As a CEO, hopefully you get the financial team with you to figure out how much cash do we need. There's two ways to figure that out. You can measure the cash conversion cycle, but that's a little bit complicated. Most finance people don't do it well, if at all. So I'm going to show you on the screen, to determine how much cash you need. Literally do your cash forecast. Week to week going forward for normally 12 to 13 weeks, but you could go beyond that depending on the cycles of your projects, and see what the low points are. When you're making payroll and paying rent, utilities, all that kind of good stuff. What is the funding deficit that I have between those events and when I get paid by my client? Ryan said 60 days, but it's not uncommon to see 90 days or something like that with GovCons. Rarely is it better than that. There's some contracts where you can actually pay yourself, like in the human social services, but those are rare. So determine how much you need. That's the tool, right? Figure out the ins and outs and what can you move around to figure out your biggest deficit. If you do that, plus you have a financial expert do the cash conversion cycle, you can get a good feel of what your gap's going to be, with really good visibility, looking out, over the next 12 to 18 months kind of thing. So that's one technique. And an interesting thing that's going on in the marketplace, with the stimulus to keep us from going from recession to depression, is that, payroll protection program funding. Good news. It was actually Dustin, a media expert, who alerted us this morning that the Senate and the House have approved extending applications for the PPP program from, supposed to end June the 30th, and now it's extended through August the 8th. In addition, previously, they've extended the use period from 8 weeks, which is hard to use 2.5 months of money in 8 weeks, up to 24 weeks. And it's eligible if you use the money for wages, for rent, for your utilities. There's certain expenses that are eligible to be forgiven, meaning that it goes from a loan to a grant and you don't have to pay it back. And most banks haven't opened up the application process to have the PPP funding forgiven. But when they do, if you get PPP funding, that's a worthwhile thing to process, right? The rules are a little bit unclear, so they need some clarification. But having a loan extinguished is a big boost for most of the CEOs that we work with. So kind of stepping on the habits. Almost all those lenders that Ryan walked through, you got to have good numbers. You got to have good financials, right? To take to them, where they can look at them and they can see, they're going to run your financials up against a database, a benchmark to see, does what you present look accurate, right? And the only way to make sure your financials are accurate is if you're using them every month, like religiously as a habit, every month on a certain date. Your sales managers, your operation managers, you look at the financials. Even better if you compare it to your forecast, where you over under, and you're teaching your manager to take the ownership so that you can land the plane where you want. But that's the better use of monthly financials, to use it like a scoreboard to drive actual results in your business. But at a minimum, when you go to a lender, they're going to look at your financials. They're going to start by looking at your balance sheet, because your balance sheet shows everything that's happened in your company since inception. Will you have enough free cash to pay the loan back, to pay the interest expense, and to pay the principal back? So if it's working capital, money kind of ends in and out, you have the additional expense. If your balance sheet tells a story, the number story says you can't pay the loan back, that's kind of game over at that point. They're not going to, even Parabliss is not going to give you a loan that you can't pay back. Now, Parabliss is more flexible. They'll structure things. It could be interest only until certain events in the company. They're more flexible than a lot of bank lenders would be. But a bank lender is going to be outright, you don't get the loan because you can't pay us back. And it's easy to see the numbers. It's not about having faith in the CEO and how well the CEO can sell the package. If the numbers say you can't pay it back, you can't pay it back. And that's the end of the story. So make sure you have good numbers. And the only way to do that is to look at your financials and use them every month, you and your managers, because that's the only way to make sure they're accurate, because the managers know what they actually did in the business. Okay. So the next habit is, get your first look loan score, right? That database that banks use, lenders use to see if you're in the ballpark or not. We subscribe to the same database that many banks use, so that when we're engineering the profitability of a company, we're engineering the financial results, literally month to month, quarter to quarter, in 90-day sprints. We want to use those benchmarks to inform our thinking, so we have clarity about what matters, and we want to use those benchmarks to know what the bank's going to think before we go to the bank, so that we can put together the best package possible and make the right ask that's more likely to get funded. So definitely get your first look. Make sure your balance sheet is strong and getting stronger, and make sure that you got the free cash on your P&L to service the loan. The kind of work that we're talking about, this is not tax prep, it's not accountant, it's somebody who knows, accounting is a machine. You process bills, you collect money, run payroll, pay vendors, make financial statements, which is really important. That's the foundation, having good numbers. But then the other things on how to make your business, be a business that can have access to the kind of capital we're talking about. That's Growth CFO work, and making sure that you can demonstrate our ability to pay the loan back, and speak to lenders so that you get better terms, right? The kind of service that they actually pay for themselves. So to bring things around the home here, so the way we help CEOs, we help them win more clients, keep the customer they have the people capacity, and access to capital is a frequent need that a lot of CEOs come up with. If you're using the numbers the way we're talking about, you're developing these habits, you can price more competitively, you deliver within your expectations, so you're defending your margin, your profit margins. That way you make the household income that you need, and you have a business that's, ultimately you maximize the value, where you can set up multiple generational wealth when you transfer the business. So we do this through Growth CFO and outsource accounting work. And we have a unique team approach where on any given week, there's at least 2, maybe 3 CFOs working on each client, just to make sure that the primary CFO is hitting it and getting measurable results in those 90-day sprints. And we stick our neck out. Actual example, relatively small investment in Growth CFO work, and we're accountable. We're not consultants. We join the team. We're accountable to drive the profitability, cash, and the value of the business. It's not words on a piece of paper, but it's literally cash in the bank kind of thing. So if you're interested going from access to capital for GovCons, the conversation we have, if you're interested in really talking about your wherewithal to get funding, I'm a good person to talk with about that. My contact information is here. We're going to send out the PDF of this slide deck to everybody, so you'll get that. And this is Ryan's contact information, and he's in McLaren, right outside of DC. Very accessible. He's been very helpful to help us get that cash fuel that we need for our clients. So,
Kirk, let me just also say that pretty much everything Kirk just spoke about is the number one most critical function that all of our clients need help with. It's strategic foresight from a financial perspective. It can't be found in just any accountant. It can't be found in just any bookkeeper. It's a very different skill set that I think government contractors would be wise to invest in the right partner to do this. And Kirk is the only one I found that with this very unique perspective that will set you up and help you look around the corner and set you up for growth. And whether or not you're going to acquire a company or be acquired or whatever your designs are, it's not a cost and it's an investment. And it's important to make that distinction, because if you're not paying attention to it, it'll creep up on you. And oftentimes contractors will sometimes make the mistake of thinking that if I just win a bunch of contracts, everything else will kind of fall into place. I'll just kind of figure it out as I go along. But oftentimes there's some opportunity costs involved with that. I think it really pays to invest now and time and resources to get this type of skill set in place. And it's very hard to find somebody to do this and hire someone full time to do this. It's very hard to find a great CFO. They come and go all the time, and oftentimes CFOs aren't. They don't have necessarily the strategic foresight, right? That's something that is really takes a long time to develop. And so I really can't stress enough how important it is to find a partner that can help you with that.
Yeah. Hey, Ryan, thank you. Yeah, most CFOs are really controllers or accounting people with a big title. That's why we distinguish it's the growth CFO. Bottom line for CEOs of growth businesses, if you don't have a financial engineer who's a real partner, then you are the financial engineer. And then, jack of all trades, master of none kind of thing, right? So it's good to have good right partners. So I'm gonna wrap it up here. You can definitely email us, call us. We're very accessible, and we look forward to making good things happen together.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Really appreciate everybody's time.
Yep. Thank you, Ryan.